The swollen river was a hungry beast. It roared with melted snow, and it wanted to swallow Eliza Norwood whole. She clutched her baby, 6-month-old Emma, to her chest, the violent current ripping them away from the shore, second by agonizing second. The year was 1875. The Wyoming Territory didn't care that she was a widow. It didn't care that she was desperate. It only cared about the pull of the water. Her raft, a pathetic thing made of fallen logs, splintered. The sound was like a gunshot, and then the icy water claimed them. She screamed, but the river just roared louder. "Hold on!" The voice was deep, cutting through the chaos. Eliza broke the surface, gasping, fighting to keep Emma's tiny face out of the water. Through a blur of river and fear, she saw him, a man on a powerful horse, galloping along the bank, matching their speed as the current dragged them downstream. "I'm coming for you." He didn't hesitate. He was off the horse in a single fluid motion. His coat, his boots, they were gone. His hat flew away as he dove into the churning gray water. He was a man with a purpose. And right then his purpose was her. His powerful strokes brought him closer. Eliza could feel her own strength failing, the cold seeping into her bones. Emma's cries were getting weaker, a sound that terrified her more than the river itself. "Please," she whispered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "Save my daughter." He reached them just as her vision started to go black, just as her head slipped beneath the surface for the last time. Strong arms wrapped around them both, a human anchor in the storm. "Got you," he grunted, his voice strained with effort. "Just hold tight to your little one." She clung to two things, her baby and the last thread of consciousness. The stranger was strong, fighting the current, angling them toward a low-hanging branch that jutted out from the bank like a lifeline. He lunged, his fingers catching it, the sudden stop jarring them. "Can you hold on?" he asked. His face was inches from hers. He had the kindest blue eyes she had ever seen. "Yes," she managed to say. But her daughter, her little Emma, had gone completely, terrifyingly silent. He half dragged, half carried them to the muddy shore. They collapsed in a heap, three gasping, soaking messes of humanity. Eliza's first thought, her only thought, was for her child. She looked down at Emma's pale, still face. "My baby," she cried out, the words ripped from her soul. "Emma's not breathing." The cowboy didn't panic. He gently took the infant from her arms, laying her face down on his knee. With a careful, precise pressure, he pushed between her tiny shoulder blades. Then he turned her over, his fingers finding the spot on her tiny chest. "Come on, little one," he whispered, a prayer disguised as a command. He repeated the motion, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Then a sudden convulsion. Emma coughed, spewing a gut-wrenching stream of river water. Her eyes fluttered open, and she began to wail. It was the most beautiful sound Eliza had ever heard in her life. "Thank God," Eliza sobbed, snatching Emma back, holding her tight. She looked up at the stranger, her rescuer, tears blurring his face. "You saved us, both of us. I don't know how to—" "Andrew Thornton," he said, cutting her off with a gentle smile. Water dripped from his dark blonde hair. "And we're not safe yet, ma'am. Night's coming. We need to get you both warm." Eliza could only nod, the violent shivers of cold and adrenaline taking over her body. "Eliza Norwood," she managed to say. "And this is Emma." Andrew let out a sharp whistle. To her amazement, his horse appeared from upriver, trotting toward them as if summoned by magic. "Smart girl," he murmured, patting the mare's neck. "My camp's not far. Can you ride?" He helped her onto the horse, handed Emma up to her, and led them toward a small camp tucked into a cluster of trees. She swayed in the saddle, every muscle screaming, exhaustion a heavy blanket. "Stay with me, Mrs. Norwood," Andrew called up, "just a bit farther." "Miss," she corrected. the word coming out automatically. My husband. He's been gone a year now. Andrew's face softened, but he just nodded, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, leading them toward the promise of a warm fire. But what Eliza didn't know was that Andrew Thornton already knew her husband was gone. He knew a lot more than that. And their meeting at the river? It was no accident at all. The camp was simple but efficient. A small tent, a fire pit, supplies neatly tucked under a tarp. Andrew moved with a quick, practiced urgency, getting a fire started, pulling dry blankets from his saddlebags. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. He handed her a blanket and a spare shirt that looked impossibly large. "I'll turn my back. Emma, too. She'll catch her death." Modesty was a luxury she couldn't afford. She stripped off her soaked dress, dried herself with a rough blanket, and pulled on his shirt. It smelled of pine and leather and something else, something clean and solid. She got Emma into a dry blanket, and the baby finally settled, exhausted from her ordeal. "Decent," she called out. Andrew turned back, but his eyes stayed on her face, a gesture of respect she hadn't expected. "You need something warm to eat," he said, already putting a pot of beans over the fire he'd brought to life. "Then you can tell me what in tarnation you were doing, trying to cross that river alone, with a baby." As they sat by the fire, Eliza told him everything. She told him about her husband, James, dying of pneumonia. She told him about the drought that killed their crops, and the bank that was foreclosing on their small homestead near Laramie. She told him about the promise of work in a settlement across the river, a job she was now certain she'd never reach. "The ferryman wanted more than I had," she explained, her voice hollow. I thought I could make it on my own." She looked down at the sleeping angel in her arms. "I nearly killed us both." "You were desperate," Andrew said, his voice quiet, understanding. "Desperate folks make desperate choices." He stirred the beans, the firelight playing across the sharp angles of his face. "Where's your family? Back east?" "My parents disowned me when I married James," she said, blinking back a fresh wave of tears. "They said I was throwing my life away." "And now?" he asked gently. "Now I have nothing but Emma. The clothes on my back. Well, your clothes now, and whatever was in my bag, which is at the bottom of that river." He stared into the fire for a long moment. Then he said, "I've got some jerky. The beans will take a while." They ate in a comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire the only sound besides the night birds. When Emma woke to nurse, Andrew respectfully turned away, busying himself with his horse. When he returned, he was holding something in his hand, a small leather-bound book. It was soaked through. "Found this in your dress pocket while I was hanging it to dry," he said, handing it to her. "Figured it might be important." Eliza gasped. "My journal." She took it with trembling hands, clutching it to her chest as if it were a holy relic. "Thank you. It has all my memories of James, little notes for Emma, for when she's older." Andrew just nodded, that same unreadable expression in his eyes. "Get some rest, Miss Norwood. You and Emma can take the tent. I'll keep watch by the fire." "I can't put you out of your tent," she protested. "You're not," he interrupted. "Been sleeping under the stars most of my life. One more night won't hurt me none." As Eliza settled into the small tent, Emma sleeping soundly beside her, she couldn't stop thinking about the quiet cowboy. He had saved their lives. He had been kind, respectful, a true gentleman. But later that night, as Eliza slept the sleep of the utterly exhausted, Andrew Thornton did something that was not gentlemanly at all. He quietly retrieved her damp journal from where it was drying by the fire. He sat with his back to the tent, and by the low, flickering light of the dying embers, he opened it. And he began to read. He wasn't looking for memories of a dead husband. He was searching. hunting for a clue he was certain had to be there, and as he turned the soggy pages, his expression was not one of kindness. It was one of cold, hard focus. The morning sun felt like a miracle. Eliza emerged from the tent, Emma on her hip, to the smell of coffee and frying biscuits. Andrew was there, by the fire, acting as if he'd been up for hours. "Good morning," he said, tipping an imaginary hat. "Your clothes are still a bit damp, but another hour in the sun should do it." "Thank you," Eliza said, accepting a tin cup of coffee. "For everything." "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time," he replied with an easy shrug. But his eyes darted away for a second too long. "What were you doing out here anyway?" Eliza asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about him. A shadow, quick as a passing cloud, crossed his face. "Heading north," he said vaguely. "Got a job offer, a ranch near the Montana border." "Oh." A strange wave of disappointment washed over her. He was leaving. Of course he was leaving. "Well, if you could just point me toward the nearest town, we'll be on our way after breakfast." Andrew frowned, a deep line forming between his brows. "You still planning to cross that river?" "I need work, Mr. Thornton. There's nothing for us back there." He took a slow sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. His blue eyes seemed to be weighing her, judging her. "That river won't be crossable for weeks, not after yesterday's rain. And even if it were," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "I wouldn't let you try it again." "You wouldn't let me?" Eliza's pride, raw and wounded, flared up. "Poor choice of words," Andrew said quickly, holding up a hand. "But there's a town, about 15 miles north of here, Riverbend. It's a small place, but it's growing. You might find work there." "Is that where you're headed?" she asked. "It's on my way," he said after a moment's hesitation that felt just a little too long. "I could take you. Make sure you and Emma get there safely." Relief was so powerful it almost buckled her knees, though she tried her best not to show it. "We'd be most grateful, Mr. Thornton." "Andrew," he corrected, a small smile touching his lips. "After fishing you out of a river, I reckon we can use first names." The journey to Riverbend was quiet. Eliza rode his mare, holding Emma in a sling he'd made from a blanket. Andrew walked alongside, leading the horse. The silence should have been comfortable, but it wasn't. It felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, studying her when he thought she wasn't looking. She tried to make conversation. "Tell me about this ranch job." "Not much to tell," he said, kicking at a stone. "Friend of my late father owns it. Needs a foreman. Been working odd jobs since the war. Time to settle down, I guess." "You fought in the war?" He nodded, his expression shuddering again. "Cavalry. Last 2 years. Came back, found my folks had died of fever. Farm sold for taxes." "I'm sorry," she said softly. Another secret, another piece of a puzzle she couldn't seem to fit together. They stopped at a creek midday to rest. While Eliza nursed a fussy Emma, Andrew disappeared into the woods. He came back a few minutes later with a small handful of wild berries. "Sweet," he said, offering them to her. "Not many, but they'll help." His kindness was a sharp contrast to the strangeness she felt from him. As she took the berries, their fingers brushed. A jolt like lightning shot up her arm. It was unexpected, and it left her breathless. He pulled his hand back quickly as if he'd been burned. He wouldn't meet her eyes for the rest of the day. They reached Riverbend just before dusk. It wasn't much, just a dusty main street with a few wooden buildings, a general store, a livery, a saloon, and a small hotel. "It's not much," Andrew said, almost apologetically, "but it's better than sleeping rough." "It looks perfect," Eliza said, adjusting Emma in her arms. And it was. It was a new start, a chance. But as they walked into town, a man stepped out of the sheriff's office. He was tall, with a silver star pinned to his vest. His eyes locked onto Andrew, and they weren't friendly. "Thornton," the sheriff said, his voice flat. "Didn't expect to see you back in these parts." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Just passing through, Wilson," he said, his voice equally cold. "Helping a lady in need." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Eliza, then back to Andrew. And in that one look, Eliza knew. This wasn't a chance meeting. These two men knew each other, and they did not like each other one bit. The hotel was run by a kindly widow named Mrs. Peterson. When Andrew explained Eliza's situation, leaving out the near drowning but emphasizing her need for work, the older woman's face lit up. "Well, now, isn't that Providence? My girl just left to get married. I need help with the rooms and the cooking. Can you cook, dear?" "Yes, ma'am," Eliza said, a surge of hope in her chest. "And I can keep accounts." "Educated, are you? Even better," Mrs. Peterson beamed. "Room and board for you and the little one, plus $2 a week. How does that sound?" It sounded like salvation. Andrew paid for a room for the night, and as they stood in the small, clean lobby, an awkward silence fell between them. It was time for him to go. "I can't thank you enough," Eliza started, bouncing a fussing Emma. Andrew shifted, holding his hat in his hands. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Eliza said firmly, looking him straight in the eye. "Not anyone. You risked your life." A faint flush crept up his neck. "Well, I'm glad I was there." He put his hat back on, a clear signal he was leaving. "I'll be moving on at first light. That ranch won't wait forever." The disappointment was a sharp pang in her chest. "Of course," she said. "I wish you all the best, Andrew." "And you, Eliza." He touched the brim of his hat, then gently ran one finger down Emma's soft cheek. "You too, little one. Stay out of rivers." And with that he turned and climbed the stairs to his room. He was gone, or so she thought. The next morning Eliza was already at work, helping Mrs. Peterson in the kitchen. She heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up, expecting to see Andrew leaving. But it wasn't him. It was Sheriff Wilson. "Coffee, Martha," he said to Mrs. Peterson, barely glancing at Eliza. He took a sip, his eyes scanning the room. "Came to warn you. Got word the Blackwell gang might be headed this way. Robbed a bank in Laramie. Killed 2 men. They were spotted about 20 miles south yesterday." Eliza's blood ran cold. She'd heard stories about the Blackwells. Vicious, merciless killers. "Lord have mercy," Mrs. Peterson whispered. "Just keeping folks informed," the sheriff said. "Keep your doors locked." Just then, the stairs creaked again. Andrew appeared, his saddlebag slung over his shoulder. He stopped dead when he saw the sheriff. The sheriff's hand dropped to his gun. "Morning," Andrew said, his voice tight. "Figured you'd be long gone by now, Thornton," Sheriff Wilson said, his voice dripping with suspicion. "Changed my mind," Andrew said. "Decided to stay on a few days. Rest my horse." The lie was so obvious it hung in the air between them. "That's so," the sheriff drawled. "Or is there another reason you're hanging around my town?" He took a step closer to Andrew. "You know, a man might think you were waiting for something, or someone." The tension was so thick Eliza could feel it pressing in on her. These men were not just acquaintances, they were adversaries, and she, somehow, was standing right in the middle of their silent war. The air in the hotel lobby crackled. Sheriff Wilson stared at Andrew, his hand still resting on the butt of his pistol. "You find what you're looking for yet, Thornton?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. Andrew didn't flinch. "I'm just a man passing through, Sheriff, trying to help a lady who's had a rough time of it." He gestured toward Eliza. "Miss Norwood here lost her husband, lost her farm. The least I could do is see her settled." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He looked from Andrew to Eliza, and a flicker of something she couldn't name, calculation, maybe, passed across his face. "Is that a fact?" he said, not as a question. He took his hand off his gun. "Well, see that you mind your manners while you're in Riverbend." He tipped his hat to Mrs. Peterson and Eliza, but his eyes stayed on Andrew as he backed out the door. The moment he was gone, Eliza turned to Andrew. "What was that about? You two clearly know each other." Andrew avoided her gaze, busying himself with his coffee cup. "Wilson and I, we've crossed paths before. He's a suspicious man, that's all." But Eliza knew it was more than that. She had seen the look in the sheriff's eyes. It was more than suspicion. It was a warning. Andrew was supposed to be gone. He was supposed to be on his way to Montana. Yet here he was, making up a flimsy excuse about his horse, facing down the local lawman. It didn't make any sense, unless his entire story was a lie. The ranch job, his reasons for being at the river. All of it. Why would he lie? What did he really want? The question haunted her all day as she worked. She watched Andrew from the kitchen window. He wasn't resting. He was watching. He watched the stagecoach arrive. He watched the comings and goings at the general store. He was observing the whole town, but his gaze always returned to the hotel, to her. It wasn't the look of a man in love. It was the look of a hunter watching his prey. The kindness he'd shown her felt like a mask now, hiding something cold and dangerous underneath. She felt a new kind of fear, one that had nothing to do with raging rivers or notorious outlaws. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear that the man who had saved her life might be the biggest danger of all. That evening, after she'd put Emma to bed, there was a soft knock on her door. It was Andrew. "Can we talk?" he asked. She let him in, her heart pounding in her chest. He stood in the middle of her small room, turning his hat over and over in his hands. "Look, Eliza," he began, "I haven't been entirely honest with you." "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up, surprised. "I'm not just a cowboy," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "My name isn't really Andrew Thornton." He took a deep breath. "I'm a Pinkerton agent. My real name is Cole." Eliza stared at him, speechless. A Pinkerton, a man who hunted other men for a living. "Why are you here?" she asked. "What do you want with me?" Cole's expression was grim. "I'm not after you, Eliza. I'm after something your husband stole." Her mind reeled. "James, a thief." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're wrong. James was a good man, a farmer. He died of pneumonia." "That's the story he told you," Cole said gently. "But it's not the truth. James Norwood, also known as Blackjack Jim, was a thief and a con man. He wasn't sick. He faked his own death. And he stole $50,000 in untraceable bank bonds." Eliza felt the floor drop out from under her. It couldn't be true. The man she had loved, the father of her child. A criminal? "Where is he?" she whispered. "That's the problem," Cole said, his voice grave. "We don't know. He vanished, but before he did, he double-crossed his partners, a nasty crew called the Blackwell Gang. They want those bonds back, Eliza, and they think you know where they are." Just then, the sound of hoofbeats thundered down the main street. Not one horse, but three. Shouts echoed through the quiet town, followed by the terrifying explosion of a gunshot. Cole moved to the window, his hand already on his gun. He peered out into the darkness. "It's them," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "The Blackwells are here." The chaos erupted instantly. Gunshots shattered the quiet evening. A woman screamed. The Blackwell gang wasn't just passing through. They had come to Riverbend for a reason, and that reason was now hiding in a second-floor hotel room. "Get Emma," Cole ordered, his friendly cowboy persona completely gone, replaced by a deadly calm Pinkerton agent. Find somewhere to hide, a closet under the bed. Don't make a sound." "What are you going to do?" Eliza cried, scooping a startled Emma from her makeshift cradle. "I'm going to do my job," he said grimly. "Keep them busy until Wilson sobers up enough to be useful." Before she could say another word, he was gone, slipping out of her room and into the hallway. Eliza's mind was a whirlwind of terror and confusion. Her husband, a criminal, a Pinkerton agent, sleeping in the room next door. The Blackwell gang shooting up the town, looking for her. It was a nightmare. She found a deep supply closet at the end of the hall and barricaded herself and Emma inside, praying the thick wooden door would be enough. She could hear the fight raging outside, shouts breaking glass, more gunshots. It sounded like a war zone. Then she heard heavy boots thundering up the hotel stairs. "Check the rooms," a gruff voice yelled. "She's got to be here somewhere." They were looking for her. Her blood turned to ice. She pressed one hand over Emma's mouth, praying her baby wouldn't make a sound. The footsteps came closer. They stopped right outside her hiding place. The doorknob began to turn. The closet door flew open. Eliza screamed, swinging a broom handle she'd grabbed in desperation. But it wasn't a Blackwell. It was Cole. "We have to go," he said, breathing hard. He had a bloody cut over his eye. "Now." "What happened?" she stammered. "I bought us some time," he said, "but not much. They know you're here." He grabbed her hand, pulling her out of the closet. "The sheriff?" "Wilson's pinned down in his office. He's on his own." He led her down the back stairs, moving with a silent, deadly grace. The kitchen was empty. He pushed open the back door and pulled her across the alley to the livery stable. "My horse is saddled. We ride." He threw her onto the horse, handed Emma up, and swung up behind her in one smooth motion. His arms came around her to take the reins, his chest a solid wall against her back. They galloped out of Riverbend, the sounds of the gunfight fading behind them. They rode hard for what felt like hours, deep into the hills surrounding the town. Only when they were hidden in a thick grove of pine trees did Cole finally slow the horse to a walk. "There's an old line shack not far from here," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "We can lay low there for the night." The shack was tiny and dusty, but it was shelter. Cole built a small fire while Eliza tried to process the fact that her entire life had been a lie. "James. Blackjack Jim," she said, the name feeling like poison on her tongue. "He really stole all that money?" Cole nodded, his face grim in the firelight. "He and the Blackwells stole it together. Then he took it all for himself and disappeared. They want it back, and they'll tear you apart to find it." "But I don't know anything," she cried. "I don't have their money." "They don't believe that," Cole said. "They think James must have told you where he hid it, or left you a clue." A clue. The word sparked a memory. Her journal, the locket, the things she'd managed to save, the things Andrew, no, Cole, had saved for her. "My things," she said, her eyes wide. "From the river. My journal. A locket with James's picture." Cole's eyes lit up with a sudden intensity. "Where are they?" he demanded. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled them out, the soggy journal and the small silver locket. He took them from her, his hands surprisingly gentle. He opened the locket first. He stared at the tiny portrait of James. "He doesn't look like a killer," Eliza whispered. Cole wasn't looking at the picture. He was looking at the back of it. With his thumbnail, he pried at the edge. A tiny metal plate popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. But it wasn't empty. Tucked inside was not a lock of hair. It was a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper. Cole carefully unfolded it. It wasn't a map. It wasn't a note. It was a key, a very small, very intricate key. "What is it?" Eliza asked, leaning closer. "I don't know," Cole breathed, staring at the key. but I'll bet you $50,000. This is what the Blackwells are looking for." The key was small and ornate, made of brass. It was for a lockbox, Cole guessed, a bank safe deposit box. "This changes things," he said, turning the key over in the firelight. "If the bonds are in a bank, they're not buried on some piece of land. They're secure." "Which bank?" Eliza asked. The key had no markings, no name. It was anonymous. "That's the $50,000 question," Cole said. He picked up her journal. "Maybe the answer is in here." He began to flip through the pages, his eyes scanning her late husband's words. But these were her words, her memories of James. Notes about his favorite meals, the way he smiled, plans for their future. "There's nothing in there," she said, a fresh wave of grief and betrayal washing over her. "Just memories of a man who never even existed." "Don't be so sure," Cole said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Men like James are arrogant. They like to hide things in plain sight. They think they're smarter than everyone else." He stopped on a particular page. "What's this?" He pointed to a line she'd written months ago. "James says we must always remember the 3rd of October, a day of new beginnings, our own private declaration of independence." "It was the day he proposed to me," Eliza said, her voice catching. "He always made a big deal about that date." Cole stared at the page, then back at the key. "October 3rd, he muttered. '03. Maybe a box number. No, too simple." He kept reading. He pointed to another entry from a week before James had died. James was so happy today. He finished the new fireplace mantel himself. He said it was strong as a bank vault, a foundation for our family's future. "A fireplace mantel?" Cole asked. He was a farmer, not a carpenter. "He was proud of it," Eliza said, remembering. "He spent weeks on it, said he wanted to leave his mark on the place." Cole stood up, pacing the small shack. A key, a date, a fireplace mantel. He stopped, his eyes locking on hers. "He didn't put the bonds in a bank, Eliza. He put them in your bank." "What are you talking about? I lost the homestead to the bank." "No," Cole said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "The bank in Laramie. The Laramie First National. The one the Blackwells just robbed." The pieces started to click into place in Eliza's mind, a horrifying puzzle coming together. "The robbery. They weren't just stealing money," she whispered. "They were looking for something." "Exactly," Cole confirmed. "They must have found out James had a box there. They tore the place apart, trying to find it. But they came up empty. So the bonds are still there. They must be, and we have the key." He looked at her, his expression serious. "But getting them won't be easy. The Blackwells will be watching the bank, and now so will the law. We can't just walk in." He paused, his gaze intense. "There's someone else, too, Sheriff Wilson." "What about him?" "He's not just the law in Riverbend," Cole said, his voice dropping. "He used to be a Texas Ranger. He and we hunted the same man a few years back. Wilson's not a fool. He knows I'm not here by chance. He knows the Blackwells aren't here by chance. He's putting the pieces together. And I guarantee you he's very, very interested in what you and I are doing out here in this shack." The realization hit her like a physical blow. They were trapped. The Blackwells wanted them dead. The law was suspicious of them. They were alone, with the key to a fortune they couldn't reach, and a baby to protect. The hero who had pulled her from the river was a liar. The husband she had mourned was a monster. The kindly town sheriff was a threat. There was no one she could trust. Except, maybe, the liar standing right in front of her. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cole looked from her to the sleeping baby, to the key in his hand. "First," he said, his voice grim, "we survive the night. Because I promise you the Blackwells are not going to give up that easily. They're out there right now, hunting us." And as if on cue, a lone coyote howled in the distance, a mournful, hungry sound that seemed to echo the danger that surrounded them. They took turns keeping watch. The night was long and filled with shadows that played tricks on the eyes. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through Eliza's system. Cole was a rock. He sat by the door, his revolver resting on his knee, his senses on high alert. He was no longer Andrew, the friendly cowboy. He was Cole, the Pinkerton, a man who lived in a world of violence and deception. And yet, when Emma fussed in her sleep, he was the one who found an extra blanket to keep her warm. He was a paradox, a killer with a kind heart, and Eliza found herself trusting him more with each passing hour, despite the lies. Dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. "They'll come at sunrise," Cole said, his voice a low whisper. "They'll expect us to be tired, our guard down." "How do you know?" "It's what I would do," he said simply. He checked his weapon, the metallic click loud in the quiet shack. "I need you to do exactly as I say. When the shooting starts, you get down and you stay down. You cover Emma with your body. No matter what you hear, you don't move. Understand?" Eliza nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He was talking about a gunfight as if he were talking about the weather. This was his world, and now it was hers. He positioned her in the far corner of the shack, behind the rickety cot. "They'll come from the east, with the sun at their backs," he explained. "They'll try to blind us." He kicked dirt over the small fire, extinguishing the last of the embers. The shack was plunged into a cold gray twilight. They waited. The silence was the worst part. It stretched and strained until Eliza felt like she was going to scream. Then a bird chirped outside, and then another. The world was waking up, oblivious to the life and death drama about to unfold in this tiny cabin. A floorboard creaked outside. Cole didn't move a muscle. He was like a statue carved from stone. Another creak, closer this time. Then the splintering crash of the door being kicked in. Two figures burst into the room, guns blazing. Cole was already moving. He fired twice from a crouched position, the roar of his revolver deafening in the small space. One of the men grunted and fell backward out the door. The other, a big man with a thick beard, charged forward, roaring like a bear. Cole fired again, but the man kept coming. He crashed into Cole, and the two of them went down in a tangle of limbs, wrestling for control of the gun. Eliza could only watch in horror. Emma clutched to her chest. The big man was strong. He was forcing the gun up, trying to turn it on Cole. Cole's face was strained, his muscles bulging as he fought back. The gun was pointed at the ceiling, then at the wall. Then it was pointed directly at Eliza. Time seemed to slow down. Eliza saw the man's finger tightening on the trigger. She saw the flash of hatred in his eyes. She was going to die. Emma was going to die. But then a third figure appeared in the doorway. It was Sheriff Wilson. He held a shotgun in his hands. He didn't hesitate. The shotgun boomed, the sound shaking the very foundations of the shack. The big man on top of Cole stiffened, a look of shock on his face, and then collapsed. Cole scrambled out from under the body, grabbing his gun. He looked at Sheriff Wilson, who stood in the doorway, the smoking shotgun held ready. "Looks like you could use a hand, Pinkerton," the sheriff said, his voice calm. Cole got to his feet, breathing heavily. "What are you doing here, Wilson?" "My job," the sheriff said, stepping into the shack. He nudged the dead outlaw with his boot. "That's one of the Blackwell brothers. The other one got away, but he's wounded." He looked at Eliza, huddled in the corner. "You all right, ma'am?" Eliza could only nod. The sheriff's eyes then fell on the small brass key, which had fallen to the floor during the struggle. He bent down and picked it up. He studied it for a moment, then looked at Cole. "I believe this is what all the fuss is about," he said, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. "Funny thing, I've been looking for one of these myself." And in that moment, Eliza understood. The sheriff hadn't come to save them. He had come for the key. The sheriff wasn't their savior. He was another player in this deadly game. He held the key in his palm, weighing it, his eyes glinting with greed. James Norwood was a clever man, Wilson said, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. But he made two mistakes. First, he trusted the Blackwells. Second, he trusted me. "You were his partner," Cole said. It wasn't a question. "We had an arrangement," Wilson corrected him. "He was the thief, I was the law. A perfect partnership. I'd tell him which stagecoaches had light security, which banks had lazy night watchmen. We were going to split the bonds. But then dear James got greedy, faked his own death and left me with nothing. So you've been waiting," Cole said, his own gun still held loosely at his side, "waiting for someone to lead you to the money." "Exactly," Wilson said with a smug smile. "I knew the Blackwells would come looking eventually, and I knew that when things got hot, the Pinkertons would send their best man. All I had to do was wait for you to do all the hard work, find the key, and then I'd just take it." He gestured with his shotgun. "Now I'll be taking the key and the lady. She's my insurance policy until I have those bonds in my hand." "That's not going to happen," Cole said, his voice dangerously low. "Isn't it?" Wilson laughed. "It's your word against mine. You're a bounty hunter of questionable repute. I'm a respected officer of the law. You broke into my town and kidnapped this poor widow." He smiled at Eliza. "Don't worry, my dear, I'll take good care of you." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Eliza's shock. This man was more dangerous than the Blackwells. He was smart, patient, and had the law on his side. Cole was right. They were trapped. But then Eliza remembered something. Something from the journal. James was so happy today. He said it was strong as a bank vault, a foundation for our family's future. The fireplace. "The key isn't for a bank box," she said suddenly, her voice shaking but clear. Wilson and Cole both turned to look at her. "What did you say?" Wilson demanded. "It's not for a bank," she repeated, thinking fast, praying she was a convincing liar. "James didn't trust banks, the bonds. They're at the homestead. He built a secret compartment. In the fireplace mantel he built." She was bluffing, gambling with their lives on a half-remembered sentence. She saw a flicker of doubt in Wilson's eyes. He didn't know for sure. No one did. But her homestead was closer than Laramie. It was a prize he could reach. "The mantle," Wilson repeated, considering it. He always was a theatrical bastard. He made a decision. "All right. We'll all take a little ride. You," he jabbed the shotgun at Cole, "drop the gun. Slowly." Cole hesitated, his eyes locked on Eliza's. She gave him the slightest nod. He slowly placed his revolver on the floor and kicked it away. "Very good," Wilson said. "Now, we're all going to take a nice, peaceful ride out to the old Norwood place. And if those bonds aren't there—" He let the threat hang in the air. "Then the lady and the baby are going to have a very, very bad day." As they stepped out of the shack into the bright morning sun, Eliza knew she had just set a new trap in motion. She had no idea if it would save them, or if she had just led them all to their deaths. The ride to her old homestead was the longest of Eliza's life. Wilson rode behind them, his shotgun a constant, menacing presence. Cole was silent, his face a grim mask. Was he angry at her for the bluff? Or was he trying to formulate a plan? She had no way of knowing. When they arrived, the place was a heartbreaking sight. Weeds choked the garden she had so carefully tended. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. It was a ghost of a home, filled with ghosts of a life that had been a lie. Inside, Wilson ordered. The air in the cabin was stale and heavy with dust. Wilson marched them over to the fireplace. The mantel was made of rough-hewn pine, intricately carved by James's own hands. It was beautiful, solid work. "All right, Mrs. Norwood," Wilson said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Show me." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. The bluff had gotten them this far, but now what? She ran her hands along the mantel, pretending to search for a hidden latch or a secret panel. Her fingers traced the carvings James had been so proud of. A twisting vine of roses. "He loved roses," she said, her voice a whisper. "I'm not interested in his gardening habits," Wilson snarled, losing patience. "Where is it?" "Here," Cole said suddenly. He pointed to a single, perfectly carved rosebud in the center of the mantel. "Look at the petals. They're not symmetrical." He was right. One of the petals was slightly offset. It was a detail so small no one would ever notice it, unless they were looking for it. Cole was improvising, playing along with her bluff, trying to buy them time. "Press it," he said to Eliza. She pressed her thumb against the rosebud. With a soft click, a small hidden drawer slid open from the side of the mantel. Wilson gasped. Eliza stared, her own shock genuine. There really was a secret compartment. James, the man of 1,000 secrets, had built one right under her nose. The drawer was empty, of course, but Wilson didn't know that. "It's empty," he roared, turning on her, his face purple with rage. "You lied to me." "No," Eliza insisted, her mind racing. "It must have been in there. Maybe James moved it. He was always worried about fire." "He moved it where?" Wilson demanded, advancing on her. "The well," Cole said, his voice calm and steady. "If you're worried about fire, the safest place on a homestead is down the well. He must have put the bonds in a waterproof box and lowered them down." The sheriff stared at Cole, then at the empty drawer, then back at the well that stood in the yard. The logic was sound. It was exactly the kind of clever trick James would have pulled. "All right, Pinkerton," Wilson sneered. "You're so smart you can go down and get it." He shoved Cole toward the door. "And the lady comes with me, just to make sure you don't get any bright ideas." He grabbed Eliza's arm, his fingers digging into her skin like talons, and dragged her out into the yard. This was it, the final act, and the stage was a dusty, forgotten homestead with a deep, dark well at its center. Cole stood by the well, looking down into the darkness. "You first, Pinkerton," Wilson said, holding Eliza in front of him as a shield, the shotgun pressed against her side. Cole took the rope, tested its strength, and began to lower himself into the well. Eliza watched him descend, her hope sinking with him. Her bluff had failed. Cole's improvisation had failed. There was nothing down that well but cold water and mud. In a few moments, Wilson would know they had been lying all along, and then he would kill them. She looked around the yard at the familiar landmarks of her old life, the barn where they kept the single milk cow, the chicken coop, the large flat rock where she and James used to sit and watch the sunset. And that's when she saw it. A small, unnatural-looking pile of stones stacked near the base of that rock. It wasn't a landmark. It was a marker. James had been a man of habit. He always sat in the same spot, looking out at the same view. He hadn't been admiring the sunset. He had been admiring the spot where he'd buried his fortune. The real hiding place. It had been right there, all along. "The bonds aren't in the well," she said, her voice clear and strong. Wilson turned his furious gaze on her. "Don't you start with me again, girl." "He buried them," she said, pointing with her chin toward the rock. "Over there, under those stones. He was a creature of habit. He buried them where he could sit and look at them every single day. A new kind of greed flickered in Wilson's eyes. This felt right. This felt like something James would do. He was so close to the money he could taste it. He shoved Eliza toward the rock. "Go on, dig." Just as Eliza reached the pile of stones, a gunshot echoed from the direction of the road. Wilson spun around, startled. A rider was galloping toward them. It was the last surviving Blackwell brother. He was wounded, his arm in a sling, but he held a pistol in his good hand, and his face was a mask of vengeful fury. He had followed them. "Wilson!" Blackwell screamed. "You murdering snake! That money is mine!" He opened fire. Wilson shoved Eliza to the ground and fired back with his shotgun. The yard erupted into a battlefield. Eliza scrambled behind the large rock, shielding Emma with her body. In the chaos, Cole was already climbing out of the well. He moved with the speed of a cat, silent and deadly. Wilson and Blackwell were locked in their own private war, trading shots from behind the cover of the barn and the chicken coop. Neither of them saw Cole circle around behind the barn. Eliza watched, her heart in her throat, as Cole appeared behind the unsuspecting sheriff. He didn't use a gun. He tackled Wilson, the two men crashing to the ground. The shotgun flew from Wilson's grasp. They rolled in the dust, a desperate, brutal fight of fists and fury. Blackwell saw his chance. He took aim at the two grappling men. He didn't care who he hit, as long as one of them was Wilson. But before he could fire, Eliza did the one thing they never expected. She picked up a heavy rock and she screamed, a wild, primal sound of a mother protecting her child. She ran at Blackwell, not with any skill, but with pure, unadulterated rage. The outlaw was so surprised he hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was all Cole needed. He landed a vicious blow to Wilson's jaw, knocking the sheriff senseless. He scooped up the fallen shotgun in the same motion. He turned and fired, not at Blackwell, but at the rope holding up a heavy bale of hay in the barn loft, right above the outlaw. The rope snapped. The bale fell, crashing down on Blackwell, burying him in a mountain of hay. Silence. The sudden quiet was deafening. The yard was a wreck. Wilson was unconscious. Blackwell was trapped. And Cole stood in the middle of it all, the shotgun in his hands, breathing heavily. He looked at Eliza, who stood trembling, the rock still clutched in her hand. Her dress was torn, her face smeared with dirt, but her eyes were fierce. She was no longer a victim. She had fought back. He walked over to her, his expression unreadable. He looked at the pile of stones, the real hiding place. "The bonds?" he asked. She nodded. Together they moved the stones. Underneath was a small, locked metal box. The brass key slid into the lock perfectly. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks and stacks of bank bonds. $50,000. A fortune that had cost so many lives. They stood there over an open box that could change their lives forever. "What now?" Eliza whispered. "The Pinkerton agency hired me to recover these," Cole said, his voice quiet. "The bounty is $5,000. $5,000. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of. Enough to buy a new farm, to start a new life anywhere she wanted. All she had to do was let him walk away with the bonds. All he had to do was take them. It was his job. It was what he had come for. He reached into the box. But he didn't take the bonds. He took her hand. "Or," he said, looking not at the money but into her eyes, "we could leave the bonds right where they are. Let the federal marshals find them when they come for Wilson. No bounty, no fortune, just a clean slate." He squeezed her hand. "Your husband's crimes will come to light, but so will Sheriff Wilson's. Your name will be cleared. You and Emma can start over. Really start over. With nothing." "Not nothing," Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. She looked at him, the man who had lied to her, fought for her, and trusted her. the man who was now offering to give up a fortune for her. We would have each other. Cole's slow smile was the warmest thing she had ever seen. Is that enough for you, Eliza Norwood? It's more than enough, she whispered. They left the box where it was. Cole tied up the groaning Sheriff Wilson and the sputtering Blackwell brother. They used Wilson's horse to ride back to Riverbend, leaving the mess for the proper authorities to find. When they arrived, the town was in an uproar, but Mrs. Peterson welcomed them back with tears of relief. The story that unfolded over the next few days was the stuff of legends. The corrupt sheriff, the hidden treasure, the quiet cowboy who was really a heroic Pinkerton agent. Cole's official report was a masterpiece of understatement, painting Eliza as an innocent victim who had bravely assisted in the capture of a dangerous gang and a crooked lawman. He never mentioned the bonds. He let the marshals discover them, closing the case for good. A week later, Cole stood with Eliza on the porch of the hotel. His horse was saddled. His job was done. I should get going, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Where will you go? She asked, her heart aching at the thought of him leaving. Don't have a plan, he admitted. Montana, maybe. Look for that ranch job. He was giving her an out, a chance to let him ride away, to be free of the complications he brought with him. But Eliza didn't want to be free of him. There's a plot of land just outside of town, she said quietly. The old Miller place. It's for sale. It's not much, but it has good water. A solid cabin. Cole looked at her, a hopeful light dawning in his blue eyes. A man could build a life there, he said. He could, she agreed, but he might be lonely. He might need a partner and a daughter. Cole reached out and cupped her face in his hands. Eliza, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I'm no farmer. I'm no saint. I've lied, and I've hurt people. You saved people too, she countered. You saved me. And Emma. He leaned in and kissed her, a soft, promising kiss that spoke of new beginnings. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. They bought the land. They built a life. They didn't have a fortune in stolen bonds, but they had something far more valuable. They had a second chance, born from the churning waters of a violent river. The greatest treasures are rarely the ones you go looking for. Sometimes they're the ones that find you when you're drowning. If you enjoyed this story and you believe in second chances, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more tales of survival, justice, and the strange twists of fate waiting for you.